Hi again. So we're back on the lesson about heredity, and we're going to do a dihybrid cross together. So Mendel then moved on to work with two separate traits at the same time, and he wondered whether these traits, these characteristics of pea plants, they were inherited at the same time and they're linked. So what he did was he looked at pea plants and looked at their color, so yellow versus green, and he also looked at their seed shape, round versus wrinkled, which is what we talked about in the monohybrid cross. So we can see here that dihybrid cross, so the di is, we're talking about two traits at the same time. So the setup for the question is the exact same, and we're going to be pulling all the important information out of the question text. So the traits we're looking at, this technically should be traits plural for a dihybrid cross. So we have pea color and texture. So that's what we're going to put. We're going to put pea color and texture in for the trait. And what are we missing? The species in pea plants. So because this is a dihybrid cross, the question setup requires two sets of letters. So we have to look to the question to see what trait or what allele is going to be dominant for pea color and what trait is going to be dominant for pea texture, and use those letters. So it says here that yellow is dominant to green, and round seeds are dominant to wrinkled. So we're going to use the Y and we're going to use the R. So the Y's are going to be used for pea color. So we can see here now that yellow is going to be the dominant color or the dominant phenotype. And the recessive phenotype is going to be the green. So this is wrong. This actually technically should be a small y. Okay, so that is going to be green. So those are our two alleles for pea color. Next, we're going to have two alleles for texture of pea seeds. And then we're going to have round and wrinkled. So round is dominant, so let's put that in for the capital letter. And wrinkled is recessive. Okay, so now we have assigned our traits. Then we have 3 steps to talk about the parent phenotypes. So basically we're going to look at one parent and see what color and texture it has, and then cross it with another parent with a color and a texture. So let's just write that down. So it says 2 heterozygous pea plants are crossed for 2 traits, pea color and texture. Now, what the heck? The question has told us not the phenotypes, it's told us the genotypes right away. It says 2 heterozygous pea plants are crossed for 2 traits. So they're heterozygous for both traits and both parents are heterozygous. So that's crazy. So let's go ahead and do the genotypes first. So we have to give each parent 2 alleles for pea color and 2 alleles for pea texture. So this first parent is heterozygous for both traits. So we're going to give it 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele for color, and 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele for texture of pea seeds. So you can see here we're following the rule again where I'm always writing the dominant letter first. And which letters do I write first? Okay, so in the question I stuck with, let's do a different color. I talked about pea color first, and those were the 2 alleles I gave first as well. So again, I'm going to put the Y's first before the R's. And also, another thing to take note of is that because we have a dominant Y and a dominant R in this genotype, we don't actually write it with both dominants first, like that. Okay, we keep the same letters together first, and then the same set of letters together next. So we're going to put both Y's together first, and then both R's next. And within those letters, you're going to put the dominant ones first. Okay, so those are some pretty specific rules there. And it says the other parent is the same, heterozygous for both traits. So I'm going to put the Y's first because we're talking about pea color first always. And then I'm going to put the 2 R's for P texture, okay, with the dominant one first. All right, so this means that if we're going backwards and we have to figure out what the phenotypes are, because each set of alleles has at least one dominant letter, so the Y's has a dominant Y and a recessive Y, that heterozygous combination gives that parent a phenotype that's dominant. So that means that is going to represent a yellow. This is going to be a yellow plant. So we're going to put yellow, which is dominant. A yellow round individual. Okay, so that plant is a yellow round parent. Cross with another yellow round parent. Now if you have everything set up properly, the letters actually will tell you what those phenotypes are, because Y is the dominant stands for yellow and R is the dominant stands for round. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. Okay, so to come up with the gametes, we're going to create all the possible gametes that are haploid. So that means each gamete has to have at least one Y and at least one R. But we have 2 different Y's and 2 different R's in each parent. So I'm going to do it a little bit off to the side here to show you. So if this is the same genotype for both parents, then each individual gamete has to have at least one Y and at least one R. Okay, so I'm going to use FOIL here, just like math. So I'm going to do the first, okay, right here, the first one for both. Okay, so 1 capital Y, 1 dominant, and 1 dominant R. So these are haploid because they don't have 2 Y's and 2 R's. They only have 1 of each. So the parent would be diploid and the gamete would be haploid. Okay, the next combination I can do is the first dominant Y and the second R. Okay, so that's my second gamete. And the next combination I can do is the second Y and the first R. Okay, 2 insides. Okay, so that's going to be like this. Now again, careful with this guy, because you might think, oh, Mrs. Daly told me to write the dominant one first. And even though there is 1 dominant R, don't put that before the Y, because the Y's always go first, no matter what. The next combination, and the last combination, is a lowercase y and a lowercase r. So this follows kind of like the FOIL math process, as if we were multiplying through brackets. Just like that. So we can see we have 4 potential different gametes. That's crazy. So let's put that down here. So you'd have to write all these down here for both parents. So it's every possible combination. So 4 different gametes from parent 1. And because parent 2 has the same genotype, we can just put in the same 4 gametes. So that's kind of nice. There. So that would be 3 marks right there. Okay. So now we have to take these gametes, these 4 gametes from each parent, and put them into the Punnett square. Okay, so let's do that. All right. So you can see now your Punnett square is pretty darn big. Okay. So it doesn't matter which gametes you put on the top, which gametes you put along the rows. Let's go ahead and just put them in. So I did parent 1 up here, and then I'm going to put parent 2 down the side. It really doesn't matter which parent you put on the top, which one on the bottom or on the side, because you're going to end up with the same ratios, just in a different order. Oops, I screwed up there. I have to put them down. Sorry about that. So you can see it gets a little bit more complicated here. So in this first box, in the first column in the first row, okay, we can see I'm going to have a mixture of two Y's, one from each parent, and both of them are dominant, so it doesn't matter which one I put first, but always put the Y first. And we can see now that we have a mixture also of the two dominant R's. So I'm going to put those two R's there. Okay, so this individual is homozygous dominant for both traits. Okay, so now I'm going to go down the row and show you kind of how to do it fast. So this whole row here, they're all going to have this dominant Y from that first parent. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in there. Okay, and they're all going to have that dominant R from that first parent. So I'm going to put that in there. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at these Y's from the rows, and I'm going to put those in. So there's a dominant Y, and there's a lowercase y, and there's another lowercase y. And my second allele here is going to be this small r, and this big R, and this small r. Okay, so you'll notice I've always written the Y's first and the R's second, and within those combinations, within those pairs, I've always written the dominant one first. Okay, so if we go ahead and do the second column, you can follow along here again. It's going to be a mixture of this Y and this Y. Okay, and it's going to get one of each R. So we're going to put the dominant one first. And if you follow along, we can do the rest of the gametes, or the zygotes here. Okay, so we see a lot of combinations here. I'm going to erase all this stuff here so we don't get mixed up. Okay. And then in the third column, let's do some more. So now we're going to take this parent here. Oopsies. We're going to take this gamete and we're going to take this gamete. Okay, so one dominant Y, one recessive Y, two dominant R's. And in the next box, I'm going to have the same gamete and the second row gamete. So I'm going to have one of each Y and also heterozygous for R. And the third one, homozygous recessive for the Y's and homozygous dominant for the R's. And the last one, homozygous recessive for the Y's and heterozygous for the R's. Okay, now we're going to look at the last gamete in the columns, the fourth column. And we have heterozygous for the Y's and also heterozygous for the R's. Let's move down. Heterozygous for the Y's, homozygous recessive for the R's. Homozygous recessive for the Y's, heterozygous for the R's. And the last one, homozygous recessive for both the Y's and the R's. So now, how do we read this? These are all the 16 possible combinations of gametes for two traits in the offspring. Now, if Mendel thought that these two traits, the color and the shape, were dependent on each other, that means that if one plant was yellow, it would always also be round. Or if one plant was green, it would also always be round. We'd always find the same two traits always together, which means we couldn't have a yellow and a round and a yellow and a wrinkled. These wouldn't be independent of each other. Okay, so let's see if that's the case. Okay, so to be yellow, that's dominant. You have to have at least one dominant Y, and the second allele in the pair doesn't matter. It can be dominant or recessive. And to be round, you have to have at least one dominant R, one uppercase R, and the second one, it doesn't matter. So let's take a look at all the possible offspring that have at least one dominant Y and at least one dominant R. So that's this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, this one. Keep on going. And you can see that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 that are yellow and round. Okay, so now I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to use blue. And we're going to figure out who is going to be yellow, which has to have one dominant Y at least, again. But wrinkled is recessive, so we have to have 2 small R's. So we're getting a little bit more specific. So at least one dominant Y, but 2 small R's. So let's circle all of those guys. And they have to be the ones in the remaining options. So that would be this. And this one. And these 2 here don't have any dominant Y's, but this one does. So that's 3. So 3 options are yellow and wrinkled. Then we have green. So to be green is recessive. This is the recessive phenotype. So we have to have 2 small Y's, but round is dominant, so it has to have at least one dominant R. The second one doesn't matter because of the law of dominance. So let's take a look at these green ones that are green and round. So out of the 4 remaining, we see that we have 3 that are green with 2 small Y's and round with at least one large R. So that's 3. And look at the last little guy here. Last little guy is the only option that is both green and round. Okay, so that's our last option with 1. So this is a very, very characteristic ratio to show the cross-pollination of these 2 heterozygous individuals for both traits, the 8:3 to 3:1 ratio. Okay, so this means that because we did indeed see yellow plants that were both round and wrinkled, that means that these 2 traits were inherited independently from each other.